Britain's on the verge of making good on its decision to exit the European Union. It's got UK politics in an almost unprecedented uproar. But if it's having that effect in the European Union, the other half of this breakup, well, that's much less obvious. Ashley Prime has held several senior British diplomatic positions, as well as private sector roles, helping UK firms expand into the EU. He now runs the London office of the Canadian strategic communications firm Navigator, and he joins us from the British capital for more on the EU part of the Brexit equation. And here in our studio, Thanos Dokos. He is Director General of the Hellenic Foundation for European and Foreign Policy in Athens. It's known by its Greek acronym ELIAMEP. That's a think tank devoted to Hellenic, Balkan, and European policy. And Thanos, we're happy to have you on the program. Mr. Prime, you're almost like my co-host here. You've been here so much lately. What with this story just refusing to go away. Let's, as I thank both of you for coming in tonight, let's just do, I'm going to have our director, Sheldon Osmond, bring up this fact file here, and we'll just remind everybody how we got to where we are today. It was back on June 23rd, 2016, 2.5 years ago almost, in a referendum that 51.9% of the UK electorate voted for Brexit, to leave the European Union. Fast forward a little less than a year, March 29th, 2017, the so-called Article 50 is triggered, and that starts a 2-year countdown to the formal exit, which was supposed to happen March 29th of this year. However, March 14th of this year, the UK government seeks EU permission to extend the exit date after being unable to reach a parliamentary agreement vote on the terms of withdrawal. A week later, on March 21st of this year, the EU 27, that's basically every member country except for Britain, decide that the UK can formally exit on May 22nd if the withdrawal agreement is passed in the UK Parliament. But if it can't pass, then it's April 12th. April 12th is the new deadline. On April 2nd, just a couple of days ago, PM Theresa May appealed to the EU for an extension but was rejected. Both the Prime Minister and the Leader of the Opposition, Jeremy Corbyn, have now agreed to try to work together to bring about a deal as the clock continues to tick. Okay, Ashley, get us started here. How has the European view of Brexit been affected by the British Parliament's inability to vote thumbs up on a plan?
Well, I think that problem has been with us for a number of months now, really, since the withdrawal agreement was nailed down between the UK government and the EU at the end of last year. Theresa May's tried to get that through Parliament now, unsuccessfully on 3 occasions. So, what we've done is, or at least the government has done, is push that sort of the departure date, further forward. And so we have so many dates at the moment. We have, April 12th next week. Then we have the 22nd of May, which is the day before the European elections. And now we're hearing that Theresa May is looking for an extension to the 30th of June. It looks like the EU may agree to that. But, I have to say, as we see it now, people are slightly getting, I think, fed up in Europe. There's a slight division with member states. The Commission, I think, is being a little bit more patient with us. But, for various reasons, a lot of them domestic, particularly in France, it's kind of, OK, Britain, you got it into this position. It's time we pull the shutters down, off you go, thank you and good night. The Commission, I think, on the other hand, is being much more sort of flexible. And I think there's a new word today. I mean, flexi something or other, where we're looking at various potential dates to leave. We've invented a whole new language for this: Brexiteer, Remainer, Ramona, all of those things. So. A kind of date when we finally might leave, is anybody's guess at the moment. But in Europe, I think people are starting to get a little bit, fed up with all of this, as indeed we are in the United Kingdom as well.
Well, let me just follow up on one of the things that you mentioned in the midst of that answer with Thanos, and that is there are EU elections coming up towards the end of May. And I wonder, Thanos, in your view, how those elections are looming as it relates to the negotiations that are going on between the EU and the UK?
Well, first of all, these are not going to be the most pleasant elections in the history of the EU. We expect the Eurosceptics, the radicals, to get a much higher share of the vote than in the past. And this is going to be a very unpleasant European Parliament to work with in the years to come.
Because it's going to be much more polarized?
Much more polarized, and then the traditional powers, conservatives, right-wing, and then left-wing socialists, will get a much smaller share of the vote. So they have to work together if they're going to get any legislation through in the next European Parliament.
If that, in fact, does transpire, as you have anticipated it will, how's that going to affect the negotiations between the EU and the UK?
Well, one of the problems is that if the new deadline is beyond the European elections, normally the UK will have to participate in those elections, and that's a very awkward situation.
That is a good point. Ashley, have people in Britain started to, or begun to consider, if they're not out by then, that they will have to participate in these EU elections, and how odd will that be?
Well, it seems like Theresa May has already hinted that if we are going to be in the EU longer than the 23rd of May, legally we have to take part in the European elections, and I think that will be extremely uncomfortable for us. I mean, the Labour Party too have said that they are starting to prepare for European elections as well, and you would get, I think, just a completely polarised position in the UK as well as in Europe between the sort of the Remain and the Leave side. I mean, I think there's just no political energy left to fight these European elections on either side. I mean, traditionally, not many people turn up for them. Only about a third of the electorate actually bother to go and vote for European MEPs. I mean, most people would not be able to identify who their MEP was in any case.
That's not terribly shocking, though. Most people don't know who their city councillor is or they're a member of the Ontario legislature, so that's not totally shocking.
But for MEPs, though, I mean, we rarely get to vote for them. We don't really know who they are. We weren't until perhaps 2 or 3 years ago really sure what they did. But, as I said, a third of the electorate bothers to turn up for European elections. But, should we be still in the EU in, 6-7 weeks' time on the 23rd of May, we will have to fight the European elections. And I think that would be really polarising even more so here in the UK. I mean, either you'll be voting for a candidate who wants to remain, or you'll be voting for a candidate who wants to leave. And in a sense, it will, I think, harden the position that the country is in at the moment on both sides of the argument.
Thanos, you live in Athens, Greece. I wonder whether, in your experience, people in Athens, Greece, care at all about what's going on in these negotiations between the EU, of which they're a part, and the UK.
Well, Greece is a special case when it comes to Brexit, because we have a large number, in terms of our population, a large number of students and a large number of university professors and other professionals working in the UK. So that will affect them and their families back in Greece. And there are also close ties between Greece and the UK. We have many of our ship owners have their headquarters in London. So Greece will be affected more than the average EU country.
So they are interested.
Yes, the interest is there. And of course, there are also emotional, sentimental links between Greece and the UK going back a long time. So yes, we care. We will be affected.
I want to ask you as well, let me follow up on the Irish angle, because there is considerable confusion, I suspect, as to how the whole Northern Ireland situation is going to work itself out. Do you have a view on how it ought to happen?
That's a problem with success stories. I mean, we managed to find a solution to the Northern Ireland problem, hoping that the UK and Ireland would be both members of the EU. No one anticipated at the time that a Brexit might have been possible. Now we are in a tight spot, trying to find a way not to create a hard border between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland. No easy solutions, all kind of technical discussions about the backstop, but lots of traps there. The EU wants to avoid some kind of situation where the UK will be enjoying all the benefits of being part of the single market without the obligations. No easy way out.
Can you imagine a scenario, though, where most of the United Kingdom leaves, but Northern Ireland stays?
Very difficult, I think, although never say never. I mean, the EU is about compromise, finding solutions to problems. So with a bit of goodwill, I suspect that at the end of the day, there will be a happy ending to this. But no, this is too technical for me, I suppose.
Ashley, there have, I mean, it's hard to recall a couple of stranger bedfellows than May and Corbyn right now, who have somehow managed to put their daggers aside for the moment and agreed to try to work together. What kinds of issues do you think the two of them can work together on in order to move the ball down the field?
Well, I think, we're in day 3, I think, of the talks today here between the pair of them. I mean, they come from sort of polar opposite ends of the political spectrum anyhow. You know, they're not best of friends. From what I understand, there's no kind of chemistry or warmth between either of them. But what they're trying to do, in effect, particularly from Theresa May's side, is solve an intractable problem with politics. And, you know, what are Theresa May's, you know, what does she hope to get out of it? Well, you know, some people are saying that she is laying a trap because if it all goes pear-shaped, she can blame the Labour Party for, you know, not playing ball, for not helping her get her deal across the line. On the other hand, Jeremy Corbyn, well, why would he want to help the Tories get her deal across the line? This is very much a Tory party, Tory-led Conservative Brexit. And the Labour Party have at best vacillated, and I think that's been kind about what their position is. But they will, of course, be looking to get best political capital out of it. And ultimately, of course, the keys to number 10. I mean, that's how politics works. And as I said, I think that the problem is we're trying to solve this problem with politics, and it's just not working. Parliament is divided. The Conservative Party divided, as indeed the Labour Party are. But then so is the country. Both sides reflect what the country is feeling. We, I think, have remained in hardened positions on both Remain and Leave. You know, and what the Commissioner are sitting there waiting for, twiddling their thumbs, is for Theresa May to come back and say, yeah, I've got a deal with Jeremy Corbyn. He will agree for the Labour Party to support me getting my deal across the line, and it'll be based on, you know, remaining in some form of customs arrangement. I don't think they actually like the word customs union because then that, you know, stinks too much of being stuck into within the EU. And protection of employment rights, protection of environmental standards and things like that. But if there's any hint that we're going to stay locked into what is currently the customs union, where you're able to set external tariffs, well, that'll send the Brexit voting lobby in Parliament into just total tailspin. They will not like that at all, any hint of that. And, you know, they are prepared, well, from what they say, to push the sort of the nuclear option to bring the government down. Now, the point about staying in the customs union would be that the UK would not be able to go out and set its own bilateral trade agreements with, you know, anybody else outside the EU, or anybody, indeed, like Canada, who has a trade deal nailed down with the European Union.
Let me read something now. I want to share it with you two and our audience from the Washington Post's Rome bureau chief. His name is Chico Harlan, and he wrote this just a few days ago. Watching all this, the continent's influential Eurosceptic parties, from Scandinavia to the Mediterranean, have recast their message. They have dropped calls to leave the EU and are instead advocating for the less drastic approach of changing the bloc from within. The European political scene has scarcely a party remaining advocating for a Brexit-style departure. The EU's approval rating increased sharply in 2017 as Britain began to debate the terms of its exit. A new Pew Research Center survey of 10 European nations shows that 62% of people hold a favorable view of the EU. A separate poll from last year showed that 67% of Europeans believe their country benefited from EU membership. That's the highest figure in 35 years. Thanos, does the Brexit mess suggest that those countries who once also thought about leaving the EU maybe are having second thoughts?
And third and fourth.
And third and
I would
fourth,
say.
okay.
No one is going to follow the UK example anytime soon.
Because it was so bad.
Because it was so bad, it was so poorly planned. And obviously, if the UK, which has the most diversified relationship with the rest of the world because of the Commonwealth, is having so many problems getting out of the EU, then nobody has a good chance among the other European countries. So no one is thinking about this, and I think they're right.
You say no one is thinking about it? There are no countries still a little bit on the fence?
I think not. They have made their minds. They may be unhappy with a part of the European arrangements, and they will try to change that if they can, but I don't think anyone is thinking about following the UK's example.
Ashley, how about you on that?
No, I think that's right. I mean, you know, if you go back to the referendum here in the UK, the expectation was that we'd be the first domino. We would push, and then all the other member states would start to sort of leave themselves. But, you know, when you think about how integrated our society, but actually equally importantly, our economy is with Europe, and sort of undoing all of that, which in a lot of it actually falls to the private sector. You know, we have discovered very, very quickly how difficult it is to get out of an institution and an organization which we have completely adapted to successfully over the last, 40 years, and particularly since the advent of the single market. You look at where Britain's economy was before the single market and look at where it is today. Now, since the referendum, the picture at best has been mixed. On the more negative side, a lot of money has already left the UK. In the city where, of course, I work now, they're saying that it's over £1 trillion. Now, I have no idea what £1 trillion is. It's obviously a lot of money, and that's that money, predominantly through banks, financial services, etc., has gone off to places like Dublin, etc., etc. So there has been an economic kickback already to this country, and we haven't even left yet. And other countries who are perhaps in less precarious positions than the UK was in terms of its economic strength, and at a time when the economies in globally are starting to turn. Look at Germany, look at Italy, look at the UK. Before the 2016 referendum, we were the fastest growing economy, fourth biggest in the world. Fastest growing economy in the G7, that is, and now we're bottom of the pile. We're kicking around with Italy.
That's economy. Let me try with Thanos the issue of security, because it was only 7 years ago that the European Union won the Nobel Peace Prize because it had kept, the argument goes, it had kept Europe from warring amongst itself, the European nation states, for 7 decades. Does Britain's departure, if it eventually happens, from the EU, in your view, chip away at the security that Europeans have felt over the last 7 decades?
It certainly weakens the EU. The UK has a first-rate diplomatic service. It is one of only 2 EU countries, the other being France, that has a power projection capability with its armed forces. So it will certainly weaken the EU. Perhaps the good news is there's still NATO, and there is, I think, will on both sides, the EU and the UK, to maintain a very close relationship when it comes to security and defense. So at the end of the day, the damage will be contained, but there will be damage nonetheless.
There will be damage nonetheless, you believe?
Yes.
I want to read something. Now, this is from Peter Goodman of the New York Times. He's the European economics correspondent there. And we'll bring this graphic up under the title of Keep Calm and Carry On, which the Brits love to do. In the political realm, no one knows how Brexit's long-running theater of the absurd will end. But for much of the business world, Britain's departure from the European Union has effectively happened. Global banks and other financial services companies are steadily shifting thousands of jobs and more than $1 trillion in assets to European cities to ensure that they're able to serve customers across the English Channel, regardless of the rules that national regulators impose after Brexit. Japanese automakers have scrapped plans to expand in Britain, in part because Brexit undermines the country's virtues as a hub for European trade. Whatever comes next, a deal with Europe, an unruly exit, or another vote that could cancel the proceedings, making Brexit the mother of all mulligans, the jobs and the money are unlikely to return. Golf fans will know what mulligans are. If you blow the first shot, you get to take a second shot. In golf, they call it a mulligan. Okay, Ashley, help us with this. Do you think EU countries would like the UK to have a mulligan, take a second vote?
Well, maybe. I say that with a slightly sort of jaded, slightly sort of tired and weary response, only because the sense, I think, across in mainland Europe as well as in the UK is, we are really tired of all of this. And what will a second vote actually achieve? If there is
Well, a different outcome is the thinking.
Well, indeed, even if there is a different outcome, what do you go for, a best of three? I mean, I think that the genie and the worms, the can of worms are truly open. Sorry, I'm mixing my metaphors here, but the damage is now done in the UK. We are split, and the irony is that we're kind of having sort of two separate splits. We're splitting with ourselves in the country, within our own society, within our friends and family who voted differently, and we're sort of splitting from our European friends. Certainly over the last 70 years, we're splitting from them as well. So actually, what would a second referendum with a different outcome, what would it actually achieve? I think it, in terms of Britain's international reputation, in terms of our international standing, we are diminished. When you look at countries that have used the UK as a voice in Europe, and I would include Canada in this, we're not in that position anymore. We can't, lobby on behalf of the Canadian government in Brussels or for anybody else. Indeed, in Brussels, we're not in the room. We're not even in the corridor anymore. So, I think in terms of our international standing, we're in a very different place. I do, worry that if we go to a second referendum and you get a different result, well, the Leavers might legitimately turn around saying, well, let's go for a third one. Let's just make sure that we've got this right.
Thanos, do you believe
there
that...
is kind of...
Yeah, sorry, let me get Thanos on this as well. Do you think the European Union member states would like Britain to have a mulligan on this?
Difficult question to answer. Even people like myself, and I have spent 5 years of my life, 5 happy years of my life in the UK. I care about the country. I'm very much saddened about the decision to leave. But let's face it, the UK was never the most enthusiastic EU member state about European integration. So having a UK badly divided back into the EU, that doesn't make many of us excited about the prospect, because that may slow down even those small, limited efforts that the EU is making about more integration in areas like defense, security, and elsewhere. So it would be a mixed blessing.
Is there a part of you, Thanos, that still can't quite believe 2.5 years ago the British people decided as they did?
Yes, I thought the British were rational people. Now, deciding to jump off the cliff without a parachute, that doesn't sound like the British.
Ashley,
difficult to believe, indeed.
Does it feel, Ashley, over there like a country has just jumped off the cliff without a parachute?
Well, I think, when you go back 2.5 years and the Leave side won, what I think was evident at, literally on day one was, OK, we've won this. Now what are we going to do? There was no strategy. There was no understanding of actually what it meant to leave the EU. Within the first week, there was a briefing in Parliament to explain to parliamentarians what the difference between the single market was and the customs union and things like that. So yeah, it does feel slightly sort of unreal, if you like. We are where we are. But, I do go back to that point that, do we really want to go down the road of a second referendum? I think the Labour Party are still vacillating as part of their discussions with Theresa May on whether that's, should be a definite red line for them. Where is the parachute? We don't have a parachute. We have sort of leapt off into the unknown. And this idea that the UK will then go ahead and then negotiate all these bilateral trade deals across the world. The thing about that is it sounds wonderful, but most of the Britain's economy is outside of goods. Most of it's in the service sector, which WTO rules generally don't apply to. So that's why financial services companies have left. They've moved assets to other parts of Europe, some indeed over to the faster growing markets of Asia. Because even if we have a trade deal which allows goods to sort of flow frictionless across over into Europe, that wouldn't cover, the financial services sector or legal services or any other sector that's outside, just pure goods. So, where is the parachute? I've not seen it, and the Leave side have never really, I think, adequately explain that narrative of this is how we do it and this is going to be the outcome for the UK.
Thanos, we're down to about a minute and a half to go here, and I want to ask you, as people try to follow this story towards April 12th, which is the next significant deadline out there, what should they be watching for?
A willingness of the two protagonists, Mrs. May and Mr. Corbyn, to show a bit of statesmanship, show they care about the country, and they will try to find a solution without thinking about the political cost to their own parties and to their own political futures.
How hopeful are you that that's what will happen?
Well, looking at what at the way they behaved so far, I'm not too optimistic.
Not too. Ashley, last 30 seconds to you on that.
No, I would 100% agree there. I mean, they are playing this game through the prism of party politics. The Conservative Party, in my view, certainly in the short to medium term, are deeply, deeply damaged. And, you know, it shows what a parlous situation we're in, where Theresa May is really trying to do a deal with the devil in the UK to try and sort out the future of our country.
Grab your parachutes, everybody, and thanks for coming on the agenda on TVO tonight. That's Ashley Prime, the former Deputy Consul General from the UK to Canada. He was on the line in London, UK. And Thanos Dokos from Eliamep. We wish you safe travels back to Athens when you decide to leave our happy shores.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you both.
Thank you.
The Agenda with Steve Bacon is brought to you by the Chartered Professional Accountants of Ontario, helping businesses stay on the right side of change with strategic thinking, insightful decisions, and business leadership. Are you on the right side of change? Ask an Ontario CPA.